Okay, thank you, everybody. Would you please silence your phones? And we will get this April 11th, 2025 meeting to order with, I'm going to turn it over right now to Executive Director Steve Smith for a presentation.
All right. Good afternoon, and thank you, Commissioner Knick. Before we begin with staff reports, we just want to acknowledge somebody who's here with us today. For 43 years, viewers throughout much of Pennsylvania tuned in weekly to Pennsylvania Outdoor Life to find out more about Penn Woods and the great outdoors, about hunting, fishing, and wildlife, and very often about the work the Game Commission is doing to manage and protect our wildlife resources. Those viewers undoubtedly recognize Don Jacobs, the show's longtime host, and more than just recognize him, they probably consider him a friend. He certainly has been a friend to this agency and has been for decades. Don's passion for wildlife and the outdoors has always been obvious and relatable for viewers who couldn't help sharing in his excitement. Whether on the range, in the field, or inside Pennsylvania's Outdoor Life cabin, Don took viewers along with him on an adventurous ride that often opened their eyes to the important work we accomplish here. Don, for all your years of service and all the positive impact it had on hunting and the Pennsylvania outdoors, please accept our heartfelt thanks. We wish you all the best in everything you do moving forward. Don, if I could have you come forward real quick. Don, on behalf of the Game Commission, we'd like to present you with this print. Appreciate your service.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah. I feel like that was really serious. I gotta. All right, good afternoon, commissioners, executive staff members, Chief Counsel Martson. I feel like you don't get enough attention, so I just wanted to say hey. I'm here to give an update for our shooting range improvement program. This grant started last year. We ran a pilot program for the agency, and we're going to give a little update about how the pilot year went, the program's successes. Then we're also going to talk a little bit about what we're doing this coming year as well. So the Game Commission launched this, as I mentioned, last year. We realized that there was a necessary need across the state to help fund our aging infrastructure with our sportsmen's clubs across the Commonwealth. Projects included grants covered projects as backstops, shooting lanes, just facilities at sportsmen's clubs alone. Many of these clubs are reaching 100 years of age, and the infrastructure is starting to fail. The backstops are getting abused to the point where they're no longer safe, and therefore the funding was necessary. It's important to remember that this is made available or possible for our agency because of the Act 30 or Title 34, which authorizes our agency to use game fund dollars to cover costs and activities that are associated with the promotion of public interest in recreational hunting and fur taking. Our agency is recognized and committed to helping clubs across the Commonwealth continue our hunting and shooting heritage for years to come. So some of our outcomes we saw this past year, we had allocated $360,000 across the state for this program. We selected 2 projects within each of the 6 regions of our state for a total of 12. We had a total of 46 applications submitted across the state, and I provided there a breakdown of each region and the number of applications that we received. So you can kind of see the Southeast there. They came in with 18 different project applications, which was awesome. And we had some really great projects come out of the Southeast, and unfortunately we couldn't do all of them, but I'm hopeful this year we'll get to some of those. So I'll start with some of the selected projects and clubs in the Northwest region. Calvus Rod and Gun Club in Warren County. They were selected and received a grant to upgrade 13 traps and expand their trap and sporting clay program at the club. You can actually see the picture on the right, which was just taken this week. They actually already have their throwers installed and tuned and operating. So they're really excited to have those, and it was a great thing as they host a lot of high school sporting clays programs throughout that area. So great to see them have that up and running so fast. Oil City, Isaac Walton League of America received a grant in Venango County. They're improving safety around their Hunter's Trail range, which is a walk-through shooting rifle style range with earthen berms and backstops. They had been used for so many years that they were pretty much deteriorated to the point where some of the targets didn't even have earth behind them. So it was a huge safety issue. So they're able to reconstruct those and create a safer range for everyone. In the Southwest region, we have South Connellsville Rod and Gun Club in Fayette County. They're building a new skeet range to promote more shotgun and shooting sports. Chieftain Archery Club, which was our sole archery club that received a grant. They were planning on doing some really cool projects. However, the club board voted not to move forward with the grant about a month ago, which was unfortunate but understandable. In the North Central region, we had Fox Township Sportsman's Club. They're improving safety to their current rifle range and access road and doing site work for our new pistol range, which will increase opportunities for all club members as well as the public because they host a lot of competitions there. Liberty Township Sportsman's Association, Center County. They're building new skeet houses to provide ability to host a national level competition that will also be open to the public. In the South Central region, we had Hopewell Fish and Game. In York County, they're conducting lead remediation projects on their current rifle range as well as constructing new backstops to increase opportunities for all of their users. Mifflin County Sportsman's Association received a grant. They're improving their 5-stand and trap houses to increase capacity and safety, and so they can host more events and increase outreach. In the Northeast, we had Great Bend Rod and Gun Association in Susquehanna County. They're upgrading their trap houses with new throwers. Their previous throwers had been used for longer than 30 years and had thrown more than 360,000 clay targets, which was pretty impressive that they were still operational. But they were well used and they were on their last legs, so they were extremely grateful. And you can see Luke there, he was up there a few weeks ago. They got their new throwers installed already and they're already using them, so they're enjoying that. New Milford Rifle and Pistol Club in Susquehanna County. They're building a new training building and a covered shooting bench. And then in the Southeast, we have Valley View Gun Club in Schuylkill County. They're constructing a whole new facility to host more classroom opportunities, including hunter and trapper education, learn to shoot style programming. They're also hosting a local high school's NAS practices in there for a school that doesn't have a place to practice right now. So that was really cool, and that's actually a picture from this week. So the building is already up and under roof and moving right along. They're hopeful that they'll have their very popular youth field day held in that building in August as well. So it's really cool to see these projects already taking shape in just a few months. Columbia Fish and Game in Lancaster County is constructing a new covered area for its pistol range as well as expanding the pistol range at the club. So this coming year, we have a couple changes we made to the program. We did open the application period a little earlier, so it actually opened here April 1st, and I think we already have 4 or 5 applications in already. We've received dozens of phone calls in the last week, questions about applications or how to apply or where to find things. So it's good that the presence is building and people are excited about this. The deadline is June 1st this year, and we're going to select the winners by July 1 and notify them. This year we increased the award amount across the state to $500,000, and we're also only going to do a max of 10 projects as opposed to 12. The awards are made based off of the applications that the club submit. There's a 3-member committee that was selected by the PGC that will score them, and then we tally the scores, and then we average the 3 scores to bring up their final score. The top in those regions will be selected to be funded. And then one last change we made is each region will have a minimum of 1 club selected this year and a maximum of 3. So as you saw the chart earlier with the region breakdown, we had 18 applications in the Southeast. We may have 3 of those selected this year as opposed to just 2 if they score high enough on the scale. And then finally, I just always like to talk about this. You know, this grant and this program, it seems to be an overwhelming positive impact to anyone we talk to. You know, shooting sports is imperative to our agency and the wildlife conservation work that we do across the state. The PR dollars that come from the sale of firearms, ammunition, and archery equipment directly benefit our agency and our mission. And continuing to invest in programs like this ensures future for conservation. Many clubs across the state are in need of renovations and safety upgrades, and these improvements are an investment in our future and generations of hunters and shooters to come in the Commonwealth. And if you guys have questions, I'll be happy to entertain.
I've got a question. Great presentation and great program. With the funding sources funding that we're providing, are there any other funding sources that any of the clubs are accessing? Do we provide any information, you know, for tapping into other sources of funding, particularly for those that weren't funded?
Yeah, so we work with a bunch of different organizations throughout the year, especially even the shooting sports programs that we host in our division, including NASP, to help find funding. So we've partnered with Safari Club International, National Wild Turkey Federation, the NRA, Whitetails Unlimited, Ducks Unlimited. I can go on and on with those, but we have connections with most of those organizations. And a perfect example is the educational building that Valley View is putting together. I think they came up around $20,000 short of their goal to fund the entire project. The Safari Club International chapter there in their area actually had reached out a few weeks prior and was looking for a project that they could help fund. So we put those two together, and they actually gave them, I think, $6,000 towards the completion of that educational facility. So things like that, we share any information that we have and try and help them get to their end goal for sure.
Sure. Thank you.
Sure. No other question? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice.
Hey, good afternoon, Commissioners, Executive Director Smith, and PGC staff. Today I'm going to be presenting on our Certified Hunter Program. I'm very excited to do this and jump right in. So our Certified Hunter Program that we'll be rolling out here this year is really designed to build upon the current hunter access and ag tag programs that the PGC currently operates. In conversations with larger landowners, particularly our agricultural community, we found that there's been a disconnect for these farmers finding qualified hunters to hunt their property. And with the increase of deer damage that these communities are seeing, we thought it was a great opportunity for us to come in there and help build a solution. So what this program is ultimately going to attain is connect landowners with qualified hunters to facilitate ethical and responsible deer management. It's going to utilize the current hunter access program build out that we currently have. I know John Tauscher and his team with the hunter access side has built a really great foundation that we're able to tap into from a mapping and a GIS perspective that really let us hit the ground running. It's going to provide flexible strategies. Each landowner is going to be able to provide a property usage guide that'll be customizable for their land. Do's and don'ts for the hunters, where to park, any regulations or policies that they want as a landowner. At the end of the day, it's still their land, and they're going to retain all rights as their land, as their landowner. It's going to focus just on antlerless deer harvest with crop damage mitigation. We'll be providing annual report cards and harvest history to each landowner. Through our conversations, that was another piece of feedback that we received with some hunter access or some ag tag properties that landowners weren't aware how many hunters were hunting their farm, how many deer were being harvested. This program is going to allow us to give them very accurate numbers there. And the hunters in this program will be required to meet and uphold higher standards. So from a landowner perspective, benefits to the landowner, they're going to have that availability to have certified hunters access and harvest deer from their property, increased antlerless deer harvest, and reduce crop damage. Another piece of feedback we received is they wanted a direct liaison with the PGC. Someone, if they have an issue or they have a question, they can immediately call or email and not have to go through our dispatch center. This will provide that. I touched on the annual reports and harvest history and the property usage guides. That's another thing that we ran into. Farmers said, hey, I'd love to allow hunters on my land, but half the time I'm not home when they knock on my door and ask. I don't have time to go through my property with 20 different hunters, and this is where you can park, and you can drive on this lane but not that lane. We'll be able to work with them one time, create that property usage guide, and provide it to any hunters that would be utilizing the property. And then the ability to provide feedback, suggestion, and comments. I've had the opportunity to meet with some farmers in our Southwest region, part of the Farm Bureau, and they want that voice to be heard. They want to be part of this and build it with partnership with the Game Commission, and this will allow them to do that. From the hunter side, what benefits will a hunter have to become certified? So at the start, capability to refine skills and improve hunting effectiveness. Our I&E Bureau here has a lot of great programs with Learn to Hunt, obviously our Hunter Trapper Education. This is another step for a hunter that they can take and have a tangible certification, something from our agency that shows they have advanced skill, advanced ethics. They've got fulfillment for assisting our agricultural communities. Within this program, I'll shout out Michelle Doble and our IT team. We're building a lot on the back end for when a hunter engages with us. There's going to be several criteria that they have to meet and that we're going to have to manage on the back end. One of those things is going to be a curriculum along with a written test. That written test is very heavy on landowner relations, hunting ethics, hunting effectiveness, things that we want to mitigate any confrontation that potentially could happen between a hunter and a landowner. And within that curriculum, we're also going to stress donation to hunters sharing the harvest. So there's a piece of our curriculum in that. Participation as a hunter will be participating in sustainable and ethical harvest management. We're also going to give them additional tools, a free Onyx subscription. We have a partnership that we're working on with the North American Non-Lead Partnership to increase non-lead ammo. We think this is a great population that we can start planting that seed into using non-lead ammo options. And the Onyx subscription we think is important too, just from a property boundary perspective, make sure they're armed with the right tools that they stay on the property that's enrolled in the program. So requirements and expectations on both sides, it's a little heavier on the hunter side. In order for a hunter to become certified, they would have had to have purchased a hunting license for 4 of the last 5 years. They cannot have any wildlife or game code violations within the last 3 years, and no violation that would be considered a major violation within the last decade. They must be 18 years of age or older and submit to and pass a criminal background check. Those first 5 bullets or 4 bullets kind of came from direct conversation with farmers on what they wanted to see on their property, some of the aspects and criteria for those certified hunters. The next couple, the certified hunter written exam, I touched on that briefly. We just built out a question bank. We're doing a rough draft version of that right now. There is a study guide accompaniment with that, so they will have a study guide to go through this. Again, very heavy on landowner relations, ethics, even some farming practices, so they're aware, is cover crop planted there? It doesn't look like something's be planted, well, it could be no-tilled. Things like that, again, in hopes to mitigate any hunter to landowner conflict there. They'll also have to pass a shooting proficiency test. You can be certified in archery equipment or in rifle equipment. The rifle standard will be a 6-inch target at 100 yards, and the archery will be, we actually have a 3D deer target, so they have to hit vitals at 20 yards. So with that, they'll have to know where the vitals of a deer are, similar to a real-world hunting situation. Sign and abide by the Certified Hunter Program Agreement. It's an agreement that basically outlines all the principles and that you as a hunter is always going to act in the highest ethical and regulation standards. And also the desire to hunt additional properties and harvest additional antlerless deer. While we hope hunters will take to this and will have great participation early, we really do want to focus on hunters that have a desire to hunt these properties and harvest antlerless deer. At its core, that is the mission of this new program. From the landowner side, we're expected they'll provide access to these certified hunters, work with us to create a land usage guide, and for that they'll receive ethical deer harvest. They'll have peace of mind on who's accessing their property, when, they'll know, they'll get the report cards, and they'll still retain full control of their property. As far as implementation goes, similar to Todd and shooting sports, we're going to be piloting it this year. We hope to expand it into the future. So we're going to pilot the Certified Hunter Program in our Southwest region this upcoming summer. We really expect to go live with it and have hunters certified when the ag tag season becomes available on August 1st, or if that does change, it's going to run concurrent with the ag tag season. We already have quite a list of farmers and landowners that have engaged with myself and have wanted to sign up for this, so we're working through that list. Hunter certification is going to begin this summer. We're pretty close on that. We need to wrap up our test and do a few more aspects, but that's coming here in the next few weeks. We'll be able to begin that certification process. We expect continuous growth and improvement of the program over the next year. And where I get really excited about it is I think there's good opportunities for expansion once we leave the Southwest region after the pilot. Not only for agricultural communities across the state, but I think of county parks, I think of municipalities that have deer damage issues and want vetted, certified hunters to come in. I think this is a program we can really take to a lot of different communities as a solution for deer management. So expected outcomes, we expect to connect landowners to a community of safe, responsible, and effective certified hunters to harvest deer on their property. We expect these hunters to be upskilled both in their hunting effectiveness as well as the ethics and morals that they take while they're afield. We also focus pretty heavily on the curriculum on post-shot procedures to ensure meat is not wasted, provide some different processing tools, and really ensure that they have the education required and necessary to be successful. We hope to increase the number of landowners enrolled in the Ag Tag program, as well as other hunter access programs offered by the PGC. I do think this could be a potential opportunity for a landowner that maybe was in hunter access, had a bad experience, and removed themselves from it. I think this might be a great bridge to get them back into our hunter access program at large. Increase our antlerless deer harvest. And really just at the end of the day, we're looking to foster sustainable wildlife management partnerships between the hunters of our state and the landowners in our state. So with that, I can open it up to any questions.
I have one. Is there any room in your program as you proceed through to encourage use of suppressors?
I think so, yes. While I don't have that built directly into the curriculum.
Which is fine, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great opportunity. And being that we're in a population of hunters that are going to be a little bit more advanced and hunt often, I do think that will be a common occurrence.
Yes, I mean, most of the farms around me in the Southwest
Yep.
are enrolled.
Yep.
And where they are having reasonable success, their firearms are suppressed.
Yep.
And they shoot at distance. And then that way it doesn't run all the deer off.
Yep.
So it seems, again, I don't think it's something that we
That's
want
a
to
great point.
require.
Yeah.
It's an expensive add-on.
Sure.
But I think it's something we can encourage.
Yeah, I think, just thinking out loud, similar to how we're encouraging hunters sharing the harvest, I think that could absolutely be a piece that we put in there to get people thinking about using suppressors. I think it's a great point.
Thanks.
Tyler, maybe you put it in here. Is there some mechanism that the landowner can limit or ramp up amounts of hunters?
Yes, sir. Yep.
It's not just putting on and, hey, this property's open.
Nope, they
Okay.
can, once we have our hunter access system fully built out, we'll have a little more functionality, but early on, they can limit how many hunters they want in the property, certain days of the week.
Okay.
If they want pauses, they can hunt in October, but I don't want them, once the rut starts, I don't want them on my property. Whatever the case may be, they'll still have full control over who's on their property and when.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I have a question, kind of building on what Denny mentioned regarding the suppressor. I believe you said with the proficiency test, it was archery and rifle,
Correct.
but is shotgun also included in that?
No, for right now, we're really focusing on just antlerless deer harvest. I think there's opportunities for us to expand into potentially a shotgun, but we didn't initially start with that, no.
With archery and just rifle?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And that would include traditional bow, compound, or crossbow. Anything else? Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Good job.
I'm next, right? Am I next on your list? Yes. Okay, making sure. Okay, good afternoon, commissioners and staff and friends. First off, just want to say this, what I'm about to talk about here is going to be on your agenda for tomorrow as a real estate transaction. It gained a little bit of traction in the press when the governor's budget address came out, and he put funding in the budget to allow DCNR to essentially take over and manage a portion of what is now Gamelands 141 and commonly referenced as Glen Onoko Falls. So I think it's really important to back up and talk about the history of the Glen Onoko Falls area in State Gamelands 141. I could have never be standing here talking about this without Regional Director Mike Beam up in the Northeast. He helped put this history lesson together. He wasn't able to be here today, or he'd be giving this presentation instead of me. But Mike was the longtime land manager of Gamelands 141, and he was intimately familiar with the area and the history behind it. So a little bit about the history. Gamelands 141, the area called Glen Onoko Falls, has been an active tourist destination going back into the 1800s. When the Lehigh Valley Railroad was there, there was actually a hotel that was built there along the Lehigh River at the base of the gorge in the falls area, and you can see those old pictures of people standing there at the falls. I don't think a lot of people know that that history goes back quite that far. So what happened over time? 1911, the hotel burned down, and there's actually still kind of remnants of some of the old infrastructure, that road that you see those people walking on there. Now it's all overgrown with trees, but you can still see kind of the remnant of the old roadway there. So once a tremendously popular destination 100 plus years ago, turned into state gamelands. What you see on this map right here, everything in yellow or red is state gamelands 141. Yellow parcels were purchased with game fund or hunting license dollars. Red parcels were purchased with Pittman-Robertson federal dollars. The green is currently Lehigh Gorge State Park properties. Those three red arrows point to the initial purchase parcels of State Gamelands 141 back in 1950 through 1952 when the Game Commission acquired them from Lehigh Valley Railroad. A little more about the recreational use history. So, going back 125 years, those trails were there, the falls were there, the attention was there. When the Game Commission acquired ownership in the 1950s, there was really light use, mostly local folks that knew about it, recreated there. That picture there is a picture of the existing trails and the habitat. It's a steep gorge, rhododendron choked hillsides, and some really rocky, very technical and unsafe kind of trails up through that gorge. Really started to see the use blow up in that area around 2008. Social media kind of drew attention, so you started having more people traveling to the area as a destination to go see the Glen Onoko Falls and hike these technical trails and experience the views. Our habitat crews really had to ramp up their efforts to place signage to warn people about the dangers, and they still visit the area at least monthly to this date, trying to keep people aware of the dangerous conditions that exist in that area. That picture there is from just one newspaper article about people perishing by falling up there at the falls. That significant increase in activity also led to a really significant increase in injuries and numerous fatalities. I think one year there was 3 fatalities there from people falling from the falls, getting too close, slippery rocks. The local EMS personnel up there really started, begging us to do something about it. They wanted us to close the trail. The burden on them was tremendous, almost like on a daily basis in the summer, where they were having to go up there and rescue people that were injured or stuck that couldn't get down. In 2018, local officials and Representative Doyle Heffley from the area up there convened a meeting to say, look, we've got to do something about this. Our first responders are taxed, to the limit. We've got to make this safer. So we tried to start discussing solutions, and the result was in 2019 there was a consensus that we needed to just shut the area off completely and say, no more hiking up here. It's too dangerous. The bottom picture there, it's kind of shady. You can't see. I mean, there's even been erected a wooden fence across the trail entrance up there saying, don't go here. You're not allowed to be here. But as recent as just 2 months ago, we had somebody up there that fell and broke their ankles and had to be recovered. So people continue to violate our signage that says don't go here. They continue to hike the area in sandals and inappropriate footwear, and just really, it's a major issue and a drain for us. And so ever since 2019, there's been discussions ongoing about how could we safely reopen this area because there is such a high tourist value to the site. But there was also a recognition that this is not a Game Commission mission-oriented activity. The Game Commission is not in the business of recreational hiking trails. We're in the business of wildlife and habitat management. So to expend Game Commission dollars to go in there and spend the money to get these trails into safe condition was just not something that the Game Commission felt was our responsibility to do. Discussions began with DCNR about how could there be potentially an exchange that could benefit all the citizens of the Commonwealth. The Game Commission sportsmen, so they don't have to pay for this anymore. The local EMS folks, so they don't have to deal with all these safety issues and recoveries of injured people. And DCNR to be able to use this as a high-value recreation area. About a little more than a year ago, there was a discussion between the Game Commission, DCNR, and folks from the governor's office to try to put a little more steam behind this effort. And then in the 2025 governor's address, budget address, he actually applied funding for DCNR in there to make this happen. So we've been working with the folks at DCNR to try to come to a decision about how to move forward with this. So, I mean, that's an example of some of the signage that the Game Commission and Eagle Scout projects have been working to put up there. You can see some barriers, a rope barrier up there. But I mean, when you've got a trail that has a skull and crossbones on it, that tells you that there's something there that you should pay attention to. So by mission, this really fits better with DCNR than it does with us. DCNR is the expert in trails management. They have a whole bureau that does these things. So it really would be a benefit to have this in their hands as opposed to the Game Commission's hands. And through this discussion and this negotiation, we think that the parcel that we'll be receiving in the proposed transfer, when I talked to Mike Beam and the regional staff, they believe that the parcel we're receiving, albeit smaller in acreage, is of much higher value for our purposes of huntable wildlife and managing habitat, as opposed to the high recreational use gorge, steep mountainside of the Glen Onoko Falls. So this map illustrates, again, the yellow or orange color is Game Lands 141. The green is the currently High Gorge State Park. The tract in the center that is highlighted in the green outline, that would be the acreage that the Game Commission would be trading away to DCNR state parks. It's approximately 492 acres. Yet to be determined until we get out there and survey out where the exact boundary line will go. We're going to use an existing road as the boundary on the top of the mountain, a stream corridor on the western boundary. The southern boundary will be the boundary of the property. And then the northern and eastern boundary will be, we think, at what is an existing parcel line that we should be able to identify pretty easily. The tract that we would be receiving is it's highlighted kind of in an orange outline. I don't think it's really easy to see, but straight to the north, you see the big chunk of green that's almost a square that kind of indents into the existing orange property. That's about 368 acres of the currently High Gorge State Park. That's the snaking line down the middle there is the Lehigh River, the Lehigh Gorge itself. So that's kind of disconnected from the rest of the park on the west side. It fits right in with the game lands. You can see that white line is a road that kind of goes out into that green parcel and comes back around. So that road is co-used and co-maintained with us in DCNR right now. So that would be part of what we would be receiving. What we would also be receiving is a couple of parcels on State Game Lands 214 in Crawford County, better known as Pymatuning. And what that looks like, That is a picture of Ford Island. Those 3 green parcels are currently owned still by DCNR. There's a house, a garage there. And you can see the yellow kind of block that I put on there. That's where our Pima Tuning Learning Center is going to be. So that's in design and getting ready to be under construction. So we felt it was really important to eliminate those DCNR in holdings on Ford Island, which the rest of that Ford Island is managed by the Game Commission. So we wanted to get those parcels to clean that up and be able to manage the entirety of the island, particularly because of the new Wildlife Learning Center being there. So on the balance, it took us a couple years to get here to this point. We believe very strongly that the result will be an exchange that will benefit all the citizens of the Commonwealth, particularly our sportsmen. Their dollars will be spent where they need to be spent, better huntable habitats, and DCNR will be able to take on the responsibility of doing what DCNR does, is to manage that high-use recreation through their state park system. Questions?
Hey, Dave, there's a couple of structures on the Ford Island. Would your plan be to raise those?
Eventually, yes. There's currently the park manager of Pima Tuning State Park lives in that northernmost green little parcel there. There's a house there.
Right.
The plan would be to remove that. It'll likely be a few years. I mean, it's going to be a couple years till the Pima Tuning Learning Center is stood up and functional and usable. And at that time, we're giving DCNR time to find suitable other accommodations for their park manager to inhabit. So
Good.
The long-term plan would be have manageability over those parcels, remove those structures, return that to wildlife habitat purposes. Yep.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. So today I am going to be giving an update on our CWD surveillance, management, and research. So as of this week, we have collected over 12,600 samples across the state. As you can see, there are several hundred that are still pending analysis. The vast majority of those are roadkill samples. So we do collect roadkill and clinical suspect samples throughout the entire year. So those numbers will still change. But in terms of results that we have already gotten, over 12,000 were not detected for CWD, and 487 were positive. As we've normally seen, the vast majority of those positive detections were in disease management area 2, so the south central part of the state. And just for comparison, at this time last year, we had around 10,000 samples. So we are a little bit higher with our samples this year. For this season, our turnaround time for hunter-submitted headbin samples was on average 4 days. So this accounts for the time that those samples are submitted to the lab until those results are entered into the database. We had a maximum turnaround time of 10 days, which was 4 days faster than last year, which is great, and a minimum of 0 days. Now this does not take into account the time someone puts the head in the bin until we pick it up and actually collect the samples. So that can add a few days to this process. Our sample prevalence in Wildlife Management Unit 4A has continued to increase. This is based off of hunter-harvested deer that are 1 year or older. As you can see, our samples across the seasons has been relatively stable with our number of detections increasing. So in 4A, our sample prevalence is now around 42%. In some areas, it is as high as 77%. There are some changes proposed for disease management area boundaries. There will still be an executive order signed, and any changes that are finalized will go in the digest, but I just wanted to go through some of these areas. Let's see if I can point here. Okay, so in Disease Management Area 2, in the York County area, there would be an expansion resulting from a clinical suspect animal. In DMA 3, the Armstrong County area would be expanded as a result of a roadkill animal that tested positive. DMAs 2 and 3 would expand. There were several detections in this area, a combination of roadkill and hunter-harvested samples that were positive. DMA 8 would expand south in the Dauphin County area as a result of a roadkill detection. Disease Management Area 9 would be new this year, so that is the Luzerne, Carbon County area. This is the result of a positive captive facility, a positive hunter harvest, and a positive clinical suspect where that were found in that area. And DMA 10 would also be new. There was a recent positive captive facility that occurred in Wayne County. Last year, there was a big change to CWD management when an extended antlerless-only firearms season was implemented in 4A, 4D, and 5A. And actually, David is going to talk about that in his presentation next, so he will tell you a little bit more information as to the outcome of that season. The CWD research project is still ongoing, so this project is looking at survival and cause-specific mortality in areas where we seem to have a high prevalence of CWD, so more specifically Bedford and Fulton counties. This season, over 130 deer have been captured, with about 270 deer captured overall, and 137 are still on the air. We are finding out-of-season mortalities. So out-of-season meaning outside of hunting season, when we would not normally expect to have much in the way of mortality. And if it wasn't for this project and coloring these animals, we would have no way of knowing this is happening. In this particular case, the doe was captured in March of last year and was found in this condition less than 4 months later. So we still have, and the cause of death was CWD in this particular case. We still have a year left of the project, so I don't have definitive results to share just yet, but it will certainly be interesting to see what we find with the end of the project. And I can take any questions.
Do you know what the age of that doe was that you just put up there?
I don't know offhand. I want to say just adult doe, but I don't know offhand. I would have to look.
Okay, thank you.
Andrea, just to clarify, you said that in addition to Luzerne and the deer coming from a captive facility, also Wayne County
Yes.
as well?
So that is very, very new.
Did the agency have any engagement prior to with any of those captive facilities in any way?
Other than Department of Ag notifies us when that facility tests positive, that's about the extent.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I recently attended a Farm Bureau meeting where one of the farmers was telling me that in the Bedford area, he's been finding dead deer in his field. And I was wondering, when they find them, should they be calling you all to have them tested?
They certainly can. We would like to have them tested if it's anything that's considered a clinical suspect, so an animal that's thin or seems to have died of unusual causes. They can certainly call that in, and somebody should be able to come test it, whether it's a warden who will pick it up or one of the wildlife health techs. We should be able to do that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We've had deer collared for a number of reasons over the years for different research projects. So would we be able to kind of pull some of that data and the mortality from those studies? And is that how we're able to say, hey, we're seeing mortality now in these study areas with these collared deer, is that mortality rate higher than what we've seen in the past, is my question.
Based on very preliminary, unofficial results, this seems to be a little more unusual to have this level of mortality. When you could see in that picture, there was very green, herbaceous food available. It is unusual to be finding them like that.
And any preliminary ideas as to what kind of mortality rates we can expect with certain disease prevalence rates, or is it kind of too early to go down that road?
I think it's too soon to be able to say anything about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
One more question. Do you have any updates on potential field testing for CWD?
So in terms of something that hunters could use, right next to their harvest, I don't think there's anything that's on the radar for like the very near future. I know there is work being done on RT Quick and even third eyelids that could at least make testing faster, but it would still have to be done in a lab. Okay. Thank you.
Andrew, other quick,
sure.
Sorry about that. Just looking at my notes here. So the positive detections that you referenced, I guess in the South Central, you said, were they all roadkill or just the majority?
You mean the ones that are pending, or what? Do you mean the prevalence map?
The prevalence,
Here, let
yeah,
me go
correct.
to the prevalence map. So on the map, that is showing all of our detections: roadkill, hunter harvest, clinical suspect. When I am talking about this 42% prevalence, that is hunter harvested samples of deer that are 1 year or older, so yearlings and adults.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One more final question for you. As we see these DMAs expanding, is there any thought about, hey, so DMA 2 and DMA 3 are literally touching, same as DMA 8, and it's about to touch 4. At what point do we make that one DMA? Or do
So
we not?
we are in the process now of revising the CWD plan, and that is something that is certainly under consideration, is what do DMAs look like moving forward, and what is the best way to do that? Because they have gotten so big and these regulations are across such a large area, that is something that we would like to address and do a little differently. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. David Stainbrook, I'm the Deer and Elk Section Supervisor, and today I'll be covering the antlerless deer license allocations for next season, and I'll also cover our recommendation for the extended season and some select CWD units. So the Game Commission has publicly identified and supported deer management goals. These include a healthy and sustainable deer population, acceptable levels of deer-human conflicts, healthy and sustainable forest habitat, to provide recreational opportunities, and to improve information education. And these goals are supported both by the public and our hunters within the Commonwealth. And our deer management goals and data determine the deer population objective for each unit. So that's whether to increase deer numbers, decrease deer numbers, or keep them stable. And we look at over 750,000 data points and work through a defined decision process to determine if the goals are being met, and then to determine that population objective. And we do this in each of our wildlife management units. So let's take a look at each one of our goals and the measures that we look at. For the first goal of our healthy deer population, we look at population trends. We look at the fawn to doe ratio from our harvest data, and then we look at disease testing, primarily CWD. So you can see in the map in the middle here, all of the units in that light green, our 6-year population trend is showing stable populations. And then the 2 units in orange, 2A and 2B, are both showing an increasing population, and then 2B is the only unit that showed a decreasing fawn to doe ratio. But since it's an increasing population and our goal is to stabilize, that's not something that we need to take into account. Another point I want to make is the map on the bottom right here is all of the units that have had a CWD detection within the unit are the dark orange color. And then the ones in the lighter orange color are units that are within 10 miles of that unit boundary. There was a positive detection. We are now including those units in our objectives to take action to reduce deer numbers to get ahead of CWD spread. The other point I wanted to make was that all of the units that we've had CWD we have had that objective to reduce deer numbers, but it wasn't really until about 2023 that we began to increase allocations and antlerless harvest to a much higher level. So we're not really seeing it in our population trends at that 6-year level, but it's something that we'll likely start to see here soon as our antlerless harvest levels have been increased. All right, moving on. So I just mentioned it was really only in 2023 that we increased those harvest objectives. So the way that we did that was we took the previous 3-year average antlerless harvest, and we had an objective to increase that by approximately 2 antlerless deer per square mile in addition to that current level of harvest, which is shown here for all of our CWD units as that red dot in the figure. That is that harvest level. The great news is last year, this past season, hunters were very effective in meeting those harvest targets. You can see in all of our CWD units that level of harvest from the past season was either at goal, the confidence intervals overlapping, or even higher than that goal or that target. And so really happy with that outcome. In units 4A, 4D, and 5A, those were the 3 units, if you remember from last year, where the harvest was not at our target levels. Simply trying to increase the allocation to meet those targets was unlikely to occur unless we offered more time. And so those are the 3 units where we offered the extended season this past season. And during that season, we took approximately 1 antlerless deer per square mile during that season. So again, very effective to add that extra harvest in. But if you also recall, we did not increase the allocation in those 3 units. We extended the season, but we kept the allocation the same. Now that we have a year of success data with that extended season, we can take that into account and make minor adjustments to the allocation of those 3 units with the extended season, and we believe we can start to get those harvests up closer to where they need to be. So we did meet the targets in all of the units with the CWD units without that extended season, simply by increasing the allocation. So no changes are needed there, but we do recommend that we continue the extended season in those 3 units highlighted in yellow, the same as last year. So no change to what was preliminarily provided in the January meeting. And again, there's no real advantage of adding an extended season to any of those other units. We met the targets with the allocation needed. And additionally, if we added more units in there, we could potentially lose some of the gains that we had in the additional harvest in those 3 units that are, that opportunity is at only at a time in those 3 units. Okay, moving on to our next goal of forest health. We look at data provided by the U.S. Forest Service, and the most recent data available is for 2022, so that's what we're showing here. On the left is forest regeneration. We can see in the majority of the units, the forest regeneration levels are considered fair, that light green, and in 3 of the units, it is considered good. And on the deer forest impacts is the other measure we look at. For there, it's acceptable in most units, but for units 2C, 3C, and 3D, the impact levels were too high. And I also wanted to mention we do not evaluate the forest measures for units 2B, 5C, and 5D. That's where you can see they're white on the map. And that's basically because the developed nature of those units leads to small sample sizes for the U.S. Forest Service. So we don't use that. Yes?
For the sake of my color blindness, so on the left-hand side, the dark Is that dark green?
Yeah, the dark green units, that's 1A, 2F, and 3B. Those are ones where our
So they're
regeneration
getting
levels are considered good.
Good. And then I can see the white. You're calling the other stuff light green?
Yes.
That's fair. Is that what you
Fair. Yeah, it's considered fair.
Thank you.
And what's white?
What's white? That's fine.
White is the units where we don't look at the forest measure because the sample sizes are too small. So those are like the special regulation areas where it's more
Yeah.
developed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then for our goal of acceptable levels of human conflicts, we use a public survey. This is conducted by a third-party company called Responsive Management. The last survey was conducted in 2023, and as you can see here, the way that we've evaluated this in the past is that it's basically residents, a sample of residents across Pennsylvania are asked if deer numbers where they live are just right, too high, or too low. And since we've conducted the survey, the majority of the respondents are saying that deer numbers are just right where they live. And this is across all units. And so as far as it impacts the way that we manage deer, it has not come into play. However, I did want to bring up that when you look at it at a smaller level, not just the majority or the plurality of responses, but at a lower level, if we look at a 25% threshold, and I apologize if the color issues here, but the point here is we've asked this survey in 2011, 2017, and 2023. And one of the things I'm seeing is more and more of these units, we're seeing more residents respond with that response that deer populations are too high. However, it hasn't rose to that level of it's over, there's more people saying it's too high than it's just right. So we've seen this type of an issue, and what we're trying to do is improve our future efforts to improve this conflict measure through changes to how we conduct the survey and potentially how we analyze the data. So this is something that we're working on. But at this point in time, I just wanted to mention that and how that plays into our allocations. All right, so basically this is the flow, the process that we go through. So I've already covered the deer management goals, and then the data that we use to determine the objectives. And so I'll show this next is in each unit, whether our objective is to increase, decrease, or stabilize the population trend. Once we've identified that objective, the next step is to determine what that harvest target is. And so if the objective is to stabilize the population trend, that target harvest would simply be the previous 3-year average. And if you're trying to reduce the population, we would take that previous 3-year average and increase it by anywhere from 1 to 2 deer per square mile on top of that. And then finally, once you have that target harvest, you incorporate how many licenses you need to allocate to meet that target harvest, and that's where we bring into play the success rates or licenses needed to harvest 1 deer measure that comes from the historic data over the past few years on our license allocations and success. So for instance, in a unit, if 10,000 antlerless deer, an average harvest around that level is keeping deer population stable, and we want to continue to do that, and we see that it takes 4.0 licenses to harvest 1 deer, then the allocation calculation would simply be multiplying those two together to be 40,000. The other point I wanted to make is that you might see from year to year, the allocation may go up or down. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're trying to increase or decrease deer numbers. It may be simply taking into account the change in success rate. So for instance, if that success rate gets better, licenses per deer measure changes, we simply change the allocation, but the harvest target stays the same. And you'll see that as I go through some of the allocations. In some of these units, we saw changes to the success rates, and I wanted to kind of touch that subject a little bit more. So we went from a change where we had the mail-in applications to the first year that we did online availability, and what we saw was that increased convenience was really did change the buying patterns. We had a lot of units that sold out faster. We had more unique buyers per unit, and so it tended to have that most deer hunters tended to have more licenses in their pocket. What that ended up doing was it actually changed the success though. So we saw that in a lot of units, that licenses per deer measure changed. And so last year, the allocations were driven primarily by that new change. This being the second year now, we did see those success rates come back to a little bit back to normal, so that you'll see that kind of take into account. We're taking those newer success rates into account with this year's allocation. But I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so moving on to the population objectives. So the objective is either to increase, stabilize, or decrease deer numbers. And again, those are based on the goals of a healthy, sustainable deer population, acceptable levels of deer-human conflicts, healthy and sustainable forest habitat, and then also the population trends. So the objective will be to reduce deer numbers in units where CWD has been found or nearby to reduce disease spread, which covers the units on that below left map, all the units with the darker orange and also with the lighter orange. Then to reduce deer numbers where forest impacts are seen, so that is in 2C, 3C, and 3D, but if you'll notice, those are also ones where we've had CWD. And so it doesn't really change the overall objective in those three units. And then additionally for units 5C and 5D, the objective was changed to reduce deer numbers based on agency leadership guidance. And then for unit 2A, which is in yellow, that one has a objective to stabilize, but if you recall, we have the population trend is increasing in that unit, so the goal is to stabilize that increasing trend. And then units 1A and 3A in green, those are units where we have an objective to keep deer numbers stable. All right, so I'm going to kind of go through the next process here of the allocation level, how it compares to last year, and then comments about the population objectives. So our first one, the units highlighted in green, or 1A and 3A, both have an objective to stabilize deer numbers. The allocation ends up being the same once you factor in success rates. 2A was the one where we're trying to stabilize that increasing population. And so the allocation's at a level to maintain that target harvest, which was already increased a few years back. And so it's simply maintaining that higher level of harvest. And once you factor in the updated success rates, we don't need to allocate as many licenses there to maintain that same level of harvest. All the units shown here in dark orange are units that have already had the harvest target increase by an additional 2 deer per square mile in 2023. And for unit 4C, that one was increased last year by 2 deer per square mile. So the allocation there is at a level to maintain that already increased harvest target. And if you recall in the figure I showed earlier, we met the target harvest, if not exceeded them in some of these units. So we're able to maintain that higher level of harvest. And once you factor in the success rates, we actually don't need as many licenses to do that in some of these units. In others, we need the same. And then again, those 3 units identified with a slight increase in allocation with an extended season should get us where we need to be. These 3 units identified here in the red color are units where we are new CWD detections, whether it's 5B with the new wild detection. The allocation is set to a level to achieve an increase of 2 antlerless deer per square mile in the harvest above the previous 3-year average to reduce that population. And then additionally, we have units 3B and 3C, which have captive detections. All right, moving on to the units that are nearby within 10 miles of the unit boundary. Here the objective is to reduce populations, but we're using a lower level of harvest. You can see here we're increasing the previous 3-year average harvest by 1 antlerless deer per square mile. And so the allocation set to a level to achieve that, to reduce the population. A little bit of rationale here is we've had several cases where CWD detections have been found over 10 miles from another. Majority are closer to that 20-mile area. So this is a way to kind of factor in that spread of CWD and also take into account that it takes several years of these higher levels of antlerless harvest to start to get those populations down beforehand. So starting to reduce those populations before CWD is detected in that unit will help put us in a better place to reduce CWD transmission ahead of that spread. And then finally, units 5C and 5D, in the bottom in blue, have an objective to reduce the population, and the allocation set to a level to achieve an increase of 2 antlerless deer per square mile in the harvest to reduce the population. And 5C also has that CWD detection within 10 miles of the border. So that concludes the allocations. My last point I wanted to bring up was that with these allocations and the buying patterns of licenses last year, we believe we can offer the first resident round this year to all of our units and not have to do like we did last year with the first come, first serve with some of those units. But keep in mind that we do need to continue to have that option into the future if we do need to pull back in the future. So that concludes my talk, and I can take any questions. Thank you.
Dave, I know it's public. You put it out there. How much overall did we increase our kill across the state this year?
Across the state?
You remember, wasn't it 50,000 or it was a big number?
Yeah, we have it in the population report, which, look at this, I printed it out.
There you go.
So if we're looking at the overall increase in antlerless harvest.
Yes.
From last year, I have it in here with the percent change and everything. Okay, we were up 17% since last year. And most of that is going to be driven by those units where we had that change in harvest target for CWD.
Right.
Yep.
That's what I'm asking. So
Yep.
my
So
question, I'll get to a
are-
question sometime. The question was that is when you figure in the targets on some of those are reduced, you're taking into account the increased harvest already.
Yeah, so what you're talking about, say for instance, 2D went from
Right.
102,000, 96,000. So we've, based on the success rates, we can still achieve that higher level of harvest with 96,000 licenses allocated. So it's like we're keeping that harvest at this higher level.
Right.
And you factor in the success rates to keep it there, yeah.
And to keep that harvest level
Exactly,
going at
so-
the 470.
Yep, so whatever the harvest target would have been last year, it's
Right.
the same this year.
Yeah, got it.
And
That
that's-
was my question. Thank you.
Yep, okay.
Hey, David, what?
I thought that was my microphone.
Hey, Dave, why are you wanting to stabilize the increasing trend in 2A?
So if you recall, the objective is to stabilize deer numbers. But we have an increasing population there, so we need to keep the harvest at a higher level to stop that increasing
So
population.
you're talking about keeping the harvest at a higher level.
Correct. And we already did that in 2A. We already increased it by 1 antlerless deer per square mile in a previous year. So so we have this higher level of harvest, and we maintain that higher level of harvest, and then we track how the population responds. And then in a few years later, if the population isn't responding the way that it's supposed to, then we make another adjustment, if that makes sense.
Define few years.
Within at least 3 to 5 years, yep. Because keep in mind, the way that we're looking at population trends is in the 6 years, so.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it takes multiple years is what we see for a real action to take place.
Sure.
So Dave, I have a question. So with our license purchases now going online, I mean, technology has enabled us to be more efficient, with providing hunters the opportunity to acquire permits. But how many of our WMUs didn't sell out last year?
All of them sold out. The only one that didn't sell out was 4A.
Okay.
And I think it had less than 400 left. Okay. So all of the units sold out with the exception of 4A.
And so with the high numbers of deer in a good number of the areas of the state, does the unavailability of licenses impact our deer management goals?
Right now, we're able to meet our harvest targets.
Yeah.
And all of these units, the only ones we're not able to meet were the ones that I showed you, like 4A and the other two. But I think we can get where we need to be with an increase in allocation there. But all the other units were able to meet the harvest targets that we need to with the current level of hunters and the allocation that we're putting out.
And that's relative to the current level of hunters, but I'm saying if we have an overpopulation of the deer, and particularly down in 5C, 5D, are you saying that we're meeting our harvest goals in areas where we have an overpopulation?
So as far as this past year, the harvest targets in 5C and 5D would have been a different level than they are now because we're proposing to increase them by 2. So I can't really answer if we'll meet that, if we'll be able to meet that new harvest target or not. We'll find out after next season. But in the past, we've been able to meet, when we needed to reduce deer numbers, meet that higher level of that harvest needed to do it, if that makes sense.
I think I understand that. I'm just trying to grapple with the fact that we've got an overpopulation of deer in so many parts of the state. But what you're saying is we're meeting our harvest goals. I mean, that seems to be not in sync.
Yeah, so keep in mind, in a lot of the units that we've had the goal to start reducing populations, that really started in 2023.
Right.
It's only been a few years of these higher levels of target, harvest that we are able to meet. You're probably not going to see that come into play with the population trends for a few more years, right? So it's not it's not like we can go out there and say the deer numbers are down this year,
Right.
and it's because of this, it's because of the harvest. So it's more of like the way that we manage. We turn the level of harvest up, we monitor, and then if we need to make an adjustment in the future, we can make a further adjustment. But it's not so much of the year to year, if that makes sense.
Dave, on that, that was my question. So we turned up the spigot with concurrent doe seasons and whatever, more allocations in 23.
Not necessarily. The concurrent doe season was
built in.
that was to, like, we actually pulled allocations back in some units during the concurrent
Okay,
season.
so what are you referring to in 23 then?
That's when we changed the objective to reduce
Okay,
and increase the harvest targets by 2 deer per square mile in all of our CWD units.
Okay.
That was the first year that we
yeah,
really
got it.
ramped
Okay.
up harvest.
Yep, okay, so
And
it wasn't.
You can see all the units in orange
Right.
there. That's the majority of our units were CWD.
So excuse me, Commissioner Fetch, so, we as commissioners grapple with the high deer, high either perceived or real or whatever. I mean, to me, it's real. People, the high density. But modeling, how do you model, because we want to try to throw spaghetti against the wall and reduce numbers quickly. How do you model Sunday hunting if we throw 9 seasons or 9 days in there, whatever it is, and model these changes?
So I think when you all are thinking of ways to expand opportunity, whether it's adding days, adding season length, extended season, those types of things, keep in mind if the target harvest is at 30,000 deer and we're taking 30,000 deer
Yep.
and you add more time,
You're going to reduce it.
the success rate will change and
Yeah.
I will end up reducing the allocation in the future because we'll still meet that 30,000.
Right.
Right? So keep that in mind. Like the adjustment is all based on the objective and that target harvest, right? So adding extra opportunity, it may make more efficient use of the licenses, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to reduce deer numbers
Right.
if the objective isn't to reduce, right?
Yep. Got it. Yep.
So if
thank
the
you.
objective is to stabilize deer numbers and you add season and opportunity, it's going to be lower allocation
Lower
in the
allocations,
future.
right. Yep.
So when you talk about success rate, you're looking at that number of tags that it takes, right? That 4.0 and 3.8 number?
Yes. And
What was that number prior to concurrent? Would that number run back then?
I mean, they've been averaging around 4, but it really depends on the unit. And the other thing that I should bring up is when you have a unit that sells out in the first round, you're getting a true success. Everybody only has 1 tag, and you either fill it or you don't fill it, right? You're going to get a success rate that's about as true as possible. If you have units that don't sell out until like the over-the-counter sales, you have somebody that has 4 tags for a unit, they may fill their first or their second. They as an individual had a 100% success rate, but their tags are either 25 or 50%
Right.
success on those tags. And so just don't get confused. That's not a success rate for the hunter. It's a success rate on the licenses we allocate, right? So when you're in a situation where you're selling out later rounds, that licenses per deer measure is going to look like a pretty low success. And that's kind of where we went with needing that extended season in those units is because we were already like at a point where increasing the allocation wasn't really going to get where we were, but all the other units it was, and we showed that we got to where we needed to be with that. So does that answer for the success? It's like
Kinda.
the license success measure of
Yeah. I mean, I'm just confused as to, I mean, generally, across the state, we have a deer overpopulation. You know, and so I'm just surprised, although, you know, I concur with your science and the numbers you have up, but I'm just confused as to why they're not even more. The allocation isn't even more than they are.
yeah. So I mean, it just comes back to the goal is to take the harvest wherever it is and get it 2 deer per square mile higher to start reducing deer numbers. And we've done that in all of those units in orange, and we'll do that in all the units where it has that bold number on the right, where this year we're going to adjust the allocation to increase harvest in all those units. So I think what you're seeing here is across the state, we either have been for the past couple years, or we will now be reducing deer numbers. And the harvest is going to be at a higher level, the allocation to get there. And we'll start to see those populations respond, hopefully in the next few years here.
Layman's terms, for my help. You've increased, so your red is from last year. Like we looked at if we put these numbers up from 3 years ago, those would all be red, reduce. Like it would look massive.
From a few years ago?
Yeah.
I mean, if we pulled
Yeah,
this
the
presentation up
allocations.
from a few years ago,
And put it to this year.
we wouldn't have this many units with an objective to reduce. If you recall,
Yeah, that's what I mean.
in
yeah.
2022, it was, stabilized for most units.
Right.
And the allocation was set to a level to stabilize deer numbers, which would be lower
So
in a lot of
layman
units.
again, I mean, I agree with what Commissioner Frederick and other commissioners, we have a deer problem in most areas, if not all areas of the state. But you're responding to it by, we're not showing 3 and 5 year trends here, you're just comparing this to last year.
Right there is just showing the allocation last year and the
Right,
allocation this
which
year.
is already coming up.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, if you were to show
Well,
from,
my question is, are we doing our job? I mean, we're killing more deer, but it doesn't appear like, that's what Commissioner Fress, my concern, it doesn't appear like you cut 2F, 4,000.
I see what you're saying. Okay, so back to just because you see in 2F, the allocation went from 55 to 51.
Right.
That level of harvest that we're trying to achieve, we achieved it and we'll continue to achieve it next year, but we don't need 55,000 licenses to do it. We can get that done with 51 because success rates are actually getting better, if that makes sense. So that level of harvest,
That makes sense to me. I got it
Right.
now.
Yeah.
For example, 2A, okay, obviously you had a good success rate. So in order to stabilize, you were able to reduce the number of antlerless allocations this year because you had a good success rate there.
correct. So
Right.
factoring in that our success rates are getting better
Yeah,
from when it got worse in the online
okay.
availability.
Why in the world would we want to stabilize the deer herd in 2A?
Because that's the objective based on the
Based
data.
on what?
The data that we look at in 2A.
Now, why are the farmers wanting to kill me?
That's a different issue. So like the data-driven process for 2A, the objective ends up being to stabilize deer numbers based on the data. If the population wasn't increasing there, then it would look just like 1A in green, and we may have a different allocation. So
I guess
Like-
what I'm trying to get to is
the objective is not to reduce in 2A.
Okay. My question is why? Why? When
Because the
we're
data is
literally
not leading us to
overrun?
a decision to reduce,
It's not.
not in 2A.
Not in 2A. Man, I don't get it.
So the population report that will come out after this meeting will have kind of all the data that goes into the decisions, but I covered most of it already. But if you remember all those maps that showed,
What's that decision based on? I mean, that decision to stabilize.
That's based on the whole thing I went through with goals, data, driven, objective.
One more question. Stabilized, though, is at a higher allocation.
Correct.
From
So
where it was 4 years ago.
stabilize and increasing trend means you want to keep deer numbers here, but they're doing this. So you want to get them down here at stable.
Oh, okay. I
It
got
doesn't mean you want to get them down here.
Right.
That would be reduced. So that, it's a slight change of,
So you're not stabilizing the herd, you're stabilizing the allocation.
no.
I'm sorry.
The objective is to stabilize deer numbers.
Okay.
So we either want to keep deer numbers right where they are,
Okay.
we either want to increase deer numbers, keep them right where they are, or we want to reduce them.
Okay.
If we want to reduce them, we need to take whatever harvest we have. If it's not reducing them, then we turn the knob by 1 to 3 deer per square mile. We've done it by 2 per square mile in CWD areas and 1 in majority of other units.
Okay.
So we want to increase the antlerless harvest to a higher level, and that should start to get that population going down.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think.
I get the science, I'm just wondering about the what, where and why. Do you have the ability to flip back and go
Sure.
back to those? So go back to the part where right here.
Yep.
These are the things that you use to make that decision,
Mhm.
right? To
Yep.
stabilize, reduce, or
Correct.
increase.
Yep, so if you see, like for instance, 2A you're asking about.
Yes.
Bottom left map, it's not orange.
Yes.
It's not going to fall into the CWD reduce. We do not see deer forest impacts in that unit, so it's not going to get an objective reduce from forest impacts. The population trend, and also that public measure, remember that map was all green, so that's not going to play in. The population trend is increasing there, but the objective is going to be to stabilize deer numbers. So that's why it already got that increase in
So
the
that-
target
I mean,
harvest.
basically, those three things there at the bottom are what you use to make your decision. CWD, deer
There's
forest
a-
impacts of population trend.
There's a very complicated flow chart within the deer plan, and that goes into that population report, but this is kind of boiled down. These are the 3 ones that
Drive.
flipped the objectives
That's the meat.
for
That's the
these
meat
ones,
of it.
yeah.
Okay.
Instead of overcomplicating it, these are the main,
Did you
ones.
print this out for us?
absolutely.
Did you?
Did I? No. No.
Can you?
We can absolutely do that.
It's not in our packet, right?
No, I didn't see it.
Yeah, can we have
So,
that?
Absolutely, yeah. We'll make sure you get that.
Dave, I have just a question. This may not necessarily fall fully in your area, but we're selling out, I guess, in a good number of the WMUs relatively early in the season. So, I mean, realistically, we get to, October 1, November 1, and for the most part, all the allocation, or all what's available are sold. So what we're not doing is giving, existing hunters or new hunters an opportunity in season to be able to, purchase
Mhm.
an antlerless allocation. I mean, what we have is a buck-driven process. And I know I dealt with this directly down in our area where, a good number of hunters decided that they wanted to hunt somewhere between October and January. And they were only able to shoot a buck. And I don't think that's what we want. And so, I mean, I don't know for my peers here, how many of us didn't use our tags, but I mean, and I brought this up in the past, not necessarily to you, but is there any way, or does it make sense to provide an opportunity for hunters that purchase an antler's tag to give it back, put it back into the system?
Not currently, but I would say the majority of hunters, deer hunters, purchase their license and get their tags prior to October. It's a
Right, I'm saying, but
smaller
a good-
proportion that are in that situation that you explained where they don't get their license, and by the time they get it, most of the units are sold out.
Right, but by
that-
the time
it's a
that the
relatively
season
small number,
starts, there's nothing available. And I'm sure there's a good number of us here in the room, or I could be wrong, that when we get to October 1 or November 1 and we bought, all 6 of our tags, that we probably have some sense, we're not going to use all of them.
Mhm.
Have we ever thought about being able to put those back in the system for hunters to be able to acquire, to purchase?
That is not something we take into account, but just keep in mind, like, the success rates on allocations are based on the current system, so any major change like that would need to be evaluated and everything.
Yeah.
But I would also say, with the increase in allocations in those units, like, say for instance, 5C and 5D, an increase in the allocation there means those are probably not going to sell out as quickly, and so that issue that you're explaining may not end up being an issue this coming season. And so I would rather kind of see how things go before taking a step like that.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. I know we've talked about that regarding 5C, 5D. I mean, we're going to vote on, I guess, some increases tomorrow. But, you know, the way it exists right now is, you know, here in the state where we've got an overpopulation in a good number of areas, during the season, if someone decides that they want to hunt deer, that they can only shoot a buck.
Yeah, they're limited to wherever units there's
Yeah.
a tag left. And
I do think we need to tackle that in some way going forward. I don't know if it's a subcommittee of the board or something like that, but so we can be helpful to, you know, to some extent, because the numbers seem to be going up. And, you know, with the residential commercial development that's happening in a lot of our areas where, you know, we have an overpopulation. I mean, the deer being moved out of their areas, and I think, as we all know, the number of does that continue to birth twins, okay, are kind of outpacing our number of hunters. So we've got some issues I think we need to tackle.
Kind of just to ride your coattails there, Commissioner Pride, I would echo, you know, interest on my part as a single commissioner to explore some ways that we can get people to be able to harvest antlerless deer that, you know, either didn't get their license when most of us in this room were thinking about deer hunting in, you know, July and August, and folks come to the table a little bit later, knowing what we're trying to drive from a, you know, from a conservation standpoint. I think it's an important topic for a conversation at a later time, for sure. My question to you, David, is there's a couple units up there that have been in reduction mode for a few years now. I haven't personally seen either personally seen a reduction in those units or seen a decrease in deer complaints in those units that have been in reduction mode for a couple years.
mm-hmm.
So if this is supposed to be like a 3 to 6 year kind of window we're looking at what point in time does the scale kind of tip the other direction?
So you're saying make it a further adjustment sooner than within 3 years? In those
Well,
areas?
if we're going with your model that this is a 3 to 6 year window, and you know, maybe is it year 2, 3, 4, 5 that you know, hunters may notice a decrease in the deer population, or forestry folks may notice a decrease in deer browse impacts, a decrease in deer vehicle collisions, whatever, you know, other metric maybe you look at. All of those seem anecdotally to be on the increase, even though we've been in reduction mode for a couple years. So at what point in that 3 to 6 year window do we start to see those reverses go the other way?
Yeah, I mean, I would say going back to, like, we made the real big changes in 2023, then we had 2024. So we're 2 years into it, right? So I think we're going to start seeing the changes that resulted in the big increases that we did 2 years ago. So we've just had 2 years of these higher level harvests in many of these units, and we'll see the response here in the next few years. If things don't seem to go in the other direction, we can certainly make an adjustment sooner than that. But that's kind of the typical way we do it, that adjustment by 1 to 2, and then monitor.
So if we're 3 years through at about that halfway point,
That could be a potential time to
and complaints are increasing,
yep.
forestry impacts are increasing, then we can reevaluate and say, maybe we need to do something.
Yeah,
a little
exactly. So,
different.
I mean, if a particular unit, the objective is to reduce, we've made those adjustments to increase harvest, and it doesn't appear that the population's decreasing, or potentially the other things we're looking at are getting worse, then that would certainly be justification to turn the knob a little bit higher and increase harvest further after that. But I would want to wait at least 3 years before making that further adjustment.
Okay, thank you.
Can you go back to the slide with the healthy forest map? Okay. I was just wondering, the regeneration measure, how is that, how do you determine that?
Good thing I wrote this down. So, all right, and it's explained in the population report. So like you could look at last year's or the one that's going to come out here soon. But the way we measure it is fair is considered, it's considered fair if 50 to 70% of the forested plots that the U.S. Forest Service visits have adequate regeneration, and they have a definition of how they quantify adequacy. And then good would be at least 70% of the plots that they visit are considered good or have adequate regeneration. So it's a level of like, can that, when they visit a plot, the current forest and seedlings there,
Yeah.
are they adequate enough to replace that current forest? Or are they not, and that the future forest would not replace itself? That's kind of the level that they look at.
And that's independent of whether they're going to be eaten or not. It's just, are they there? And then the deer impacts portion of it is, will it be consumed by deer or?
It's, so the deer forest impacts measure is then specifically looking at deer individually, or like the deer impacts individually on that plot, as opposed to just the number of stems per acre.
Okay.
Right, so the regeneration measure is more of counting stems. That may or may not be affected by just deer. Like
Right.
you could have other things that play a role there, like the level of light coming down on the forest floor, those types of things. But the deer impact measure is meant to be more specific to just the deer part of that, if that
And they
makes
give
sense.
you input on this every year, the Forest Service does?
Yeah, so our foresters here within
Our
the Game
foresters.
Commission pull the data from the U.S. Forest Service website and then look at the analysis across the state, unit by unit, looking at the forest plots data, and they use the ones where we have regeneration data and the forest impacts.
To Taylor and to Haley, though, is that, how current is that data?
So they are a little bit behind with COVID. They went behind, and then now they. So the newest data we have is 2022. So it is a little bit further behind
Okay.
than we'd like it to be, but it's the measure that we use. I will also mention that as part of the deer forest study, we are wrapping up that study, and an objective of that study is to reevaluate the way that we do this and potentially improve these methods. So that's hopefully here in the next few years we'll be able to revamp this a little bit better. But this has worked for the purposes of, like on the one on the right, our deer impacts to a point where we need to address it, and so it's working for that.
So what's your degree of confidence in the information that you're getting from the Forest Service compared to what you may want from our people internally? Or do our forestry people do any of that internally?
Yes, so we have really good data on public lands,
Okay.
whether it's from DCNR or our internal folks.
That's our people gathered.
Correct,
That our people gathered.
and so we'll have information that on the public lands. The reason we use this method is because this incorporates private land as well. So these plots that the U.S. Forest Service goes on also encompass forested land, and that's private land, which is the majority of the state is privately owned,
Sure,
right?
right.
So you wouldn't want to only use a measure that's only on public land.
my
So this
idea-
is supposed to
so
be
all
as
the-
representative as possible of all
So-
land.
So deer forest impacts, but I can't see the writing. It looked to me like it says deer impacts that are are
Acceptable, yeah, so-
acceptable.
Yep, so there's a measure of evaluation of the level of impact from a 1 to a 5, and 3 is that moderate level. We choose that moderate level of 3 as what we consider is acceptable, 3 or less. If it's 3 or higher, we consider it too high,
Okay, got it.
without getting too much in the weeds of how that's measured, but
understand. Thank you.
On those plots that they're doing, David, where they're trying to determine good, fair, and poor with the percentage of regen in their plots, is species composition taken into account?
yes, they do quantify the species composition of what's in the plot. Correct.
Okay, so, but I guess my question on a more broad scale is, if you're in an area that should be regenerating to an oak type forest, and it's full of, you know, black birch, beech, are those stems counted and quantified the same way as if there were oak seedlings growing on the ground?
So my understanding of how the Forest Service does it is they have, they do count all species, but the way that we look at regeneration is a suite of species that are considered, I forget the word they use, but the tree species that we consider as important for our wildlife and that would be impacted by deer. So if it was going from, you know, a nice mixture of oak and maple and everything, and now all it is a monoculture white pine, I don't think that would show up here because it would be looking at the, you know, the species composition that we're looking for rather than
How about,
anything.
how about merchantable? Is
How about what?
Merchantable, is that,
That might be the word that they use. Yeah.
that's the word they use?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Hopefully I got that right. I think if you talk to one of our foresters, they would know way more than I do about that, but.
I feel sorry for you, but thank you.
I think this was helpful to talk through this a little bit, so
No, thank you very much. Thank you.
hopefully you guys are good, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, any other questions?
I just want to say you're doing, you know, great work. Don't look at some of our comments as kind of attacking you. I mean, I know you've got a lot on your plate, but I mean, you're doing a great job providing data for us to be able to respond to, contribute, and try to, you know, help with this aspect that we're dealing with our arguably our number one wildlife asset financially, you know, in the state.
All right, thank you.
So you'll give us a quick example?
Yes.
Good? Good. All right, good afternoon. I think everyone knows me. Again, Jeremy Banfield. I'm the elk biologist for the Game Commission. Last I was in front of you was in January. I think at that time I said something about that not being my annual song and dance because this is my traditional annual song and dance here. We'll be going over the results of our aerial population survey and then how that translates into our tag allocation. So real quick, I do think most of the commissioners know this, but just for anybody that's watching, I'm going to go through a brief review of our aerial survey. We do contract this. It is flown during the months of typically January into February when foliage is off. High definition imagery combined with thermal imagery. Sorry, we're looking at the wheel right now as the plane turns. It'll clear up here in 1 second. But we get all of this footage onto a single hard drive, roughly 90 hours of footage. And we always know where the plane is in space and time. So the time is in the upper left, and then the aircraft's position is in the bottom left, and the actual crosshairs position on the landscape is in the bottom right there. So again, we always know where the airplane is and where they're looking in space and time. They fly 500-meter transects, so those are actually pretty close together. The cone of detection for the camera itself is 500 meters. They base out of State College. That's the University Park Airport that you're seeing down there. These are just the flight lines. Red is our elk management area. Black is our survey area. And then all of the yellow dots are just detections of elk. So January 21st through February 10th this year, 15 flights. We actually had 2 aircraft working together in tandem this year, over 11,000 miles, and they saw 74 groups of elk. We used the radio collared individuals to evaluate the accuracy of the survey in a mark recapture framework. So the marks are the radio collared individuals, right? They're essentially our spies, if you will, out there on the landscape and mixed into the population. And then the survey or the flight over top is the recapture for that. That yields a detection rate of, there was 106 collars available this year. They saw 68 of them, so that gave us a 64% detection rate. You can see that far right column. That is on par almost, to a T with the other years, with the exception of maybe 2023 was a little bit higher, but we're always kind of hovering right around that 60 to 65% in our detection rate, which is good. It's nice and consistent. Point estimate for this year was 1342, and they saw a total of 865 elk. Look at that graphically through the years. Basically, the story here is that the population is stable, right? There's annual variations and fluctuations. The true population is probably oscillating somewhere along that red line, but it's relatively stable. Nice overlap between the confidence intervals between year to year. I think I would like to see a little bit of more of an incline and a slow increase into the population, but we're stable for the time being. We'll see what next year brings. How do we translate this into our tag allocations? So we use a pretty simple model here. It starts off with the annual survey, the annual population estimate. We multiply that by non-harvest survival. So that would be, anything that is non-harvest related in the different survival rates, and it's broken down by bulls, cows, and calves. We can subtract off harvest because we know that. We do have a mandatory check station, so we know exactly how many animals are being removed. We then get a target harvest, which is inflated for long-term success rates. And then we do ask our wardens to do what we'd call a conflict adjustment. So are they experiencing, exceptional conflicts in their districts, and would they like to see additional elk removed from those areas? So there's a subjective component there that comes from the local wardens. Output of that model is basically looking into the future here of the next 5 years, 6 years, is that the population will continue to be stable or slightly increase. Again, that is in line with our management plan. The objective for that is at the bottom there, and that's maintain a stable or increasing elk population within the elk management area. So prediction is that we will do that using these recommended tag allocations for this year. So 65 bulls, 75 cows is what we're going to recommend this year. That, again, is split across it's split into 3 different specific seasons: archery season, general season, late season, and then it's split across the 14 different hunt zones. Comparing that to years past, this is identical to what it was last year and very similar to what it was in 2023. So we're trying to get a trend here over the past 3 years and keep the harvest level relatively consistent and see how that is affecting the population. Secondary strategy that does come into play here is trying to get our bull to cow ratio to at least 25 branch bulls per 100 cows. Upper left chart there you can see is our observed ratios. I think it's clear to say we've been above objective for some time now. The prediction is that it will continue to pull that objective downward. Again, I'd like to keep the harvest level where it has been in this current season. That'll give us a 3-year trend. And if we don't see that bull to cow ratio start to come down, you can expect some changes for the 2026 season. And that was it. If I can take any questions off of any of that. It's pretty short, simple.
Jeremy, I have a question. The slide that you had regarding kind of with the red line, I guess there was a bump up or an increase of, I think, around 1492 in 2023.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to go back to it?
Yeah. 1497, excuse me. Any sense of what that jump was from 23?
No, it's imperfect data. It's annual variation. Again, what we really want to focus on is that the confidence intervals overlap pretty heavily here. So true population is somewhere between all of those confidence intervals. I mean, it'd be the same thing of that 1480 there. The true population is probably hovering right around 1,400, maybe 1,500 animals. So I wouldn't read too much into, the individual kind of oscillations there, but year to year. Again, it's more of like, is that line going up or is that line going down? And again, we'd like to see it increase a little bit more. I think next year, if we see an increase, it'll bump it back up. But again, for this year, I'm trying to hold harvest levels consistent with where they were the past 2 years, so we have a 3-year trend.
So we're healthy.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Thank you.
This might be a silly question, but given the impending doom of CWD, would it make sense to maybe grow the population now to kind of pad our numbers?
If you do that, you offer more opportunity for spread by having a higher population. So I would say no. It's a catch-22 though. I mean, you could make the argument almost either way. for the time being, I would say that we should try and stick with the management plan, which is keep it stable or increasing, slowly increasing. Yeah. Did that answer your question? It does, yeah. Okay.
Are elk populations on the East Coast, Kentucky or Virginia, West Virginia, wherever there's elk? I may be wrong on some of these states, but is there any CWD in those herds on the East Coast?
Yeah, so
There
if
is.
if you think of eastern elk, you hit several of them. I mean,
Okay.
Kentucky would have the largest population, probably followed by us, but Arkansas does have chronic wasting disease in
Okay.
both their deer and their elk. They actually found it originally in their elk population, and then they used targeted removal on a lot of deer in the area and found it in their deer, obviously, as well. Their general approach to this is try and reduce deer populations as much as possible, and then basically try and keep their elk population stable. You run the risk of taking a sensitive population and making it endangered by taking out too many animals or taking more animals than potentially CWD would. And there's a lot of gray in there, obviously, but that's their general approach to it, is try and keep that population as stable as they possibly can and reduce deer populations surrounding their elk population. So I do know those guys well. I've talked to them, and we consider all that stuff and moving forward with our elk response to CWD. Hopefully it'll be years.
Right. Thank you.
Jeremy, are you happy with the pregnancy rate?
Say that one more time.
Are you happy with the pregnancy rate?
Am I
With all those
happy
bulls,
with
you would think we'd have a 100% pregnancy rate, you know?
So it is slightly lower than expected given our given the condition of the cows. We've done several research projects into pregnancy rate and then calf survival and kind of all the things related to reproduction in general. We do see some delayed conception going on with our cows. They are still reaching roughly 80% pregnant in our prime-aged females. They're just reaching it a little bit later. Our calf survival projects showed that that's not really having any effect on the population, as in there was no difference between calf survival on animals that were born when they should be and then animals that were kind of late born. So we're still seeing a little, like, the book would say that you should be somewhere around 90 to 95%, and we're at about 80%. So there's some subtle thing that is off there. I'm just not exactly sure what it is yet. We continue to look into that. So yes, it's not red flag, scary, low. It's suspiciously low. It'd be nice if it went up a little bit, but again, it's not having an effect on the population per se.
Are we on par with other elk populations, like western elk populations, or the elk in Kentucky?
Yeah.
Are they experiencing the same thing you are?
No. Well, it depends on what we're talking about. So when we come to pregnancy rates, no. Again, we have a slightly lower pregnancy rate than some of the western populations. When it comes to calf survival, we have a much higher calf survival rate, but we also don't have the suite of predators that the western states do.
How about eastern Kentucky?
Kentucky has done similar projects. They're probably the only one that has done a similar project, and we're on par with them in terms of calf
On par
survival.
with them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay. Good. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brandon Snavely. I'm the black bear biologist for the PDC. Today I'm just covering some black bear population status and research updates. All right, so first I want to go over bear license sales. Just as a reminder to everybody, the bear license was created in 1981, and it's required for every hunter that wants to go bear hunting. Bear license sales, they've remained at a high level. So this year was the 6th greatest bear license sales on record, and they remained above 200,000 license sales, and this is for the 6th year in a row. There was 2,642 total bears harvested in 2024. 2024 bear harvest, it was the 24th most bears harvested in Pennsylvania. And most of these came from our north central counties, and that were Tioga, Clinton, and Lycoming counties were our top 3 counties for harvest. However, this was a 10% decline from what the 2023 total bear harvest was. And we can see that in different seasons. There was actually an increase in archery season by about 8%, a 17% increase in the muzzleloader and special firearms season. But then in regards to the decrease, there was about a 28% decrease in the extended firearms season and a 24% decrease in the general season. And the average the average weights of all our bears was about 183 pounds, and 47% of all our harvested adults were females. So getting into the harvest rate in the general season, or regular firearms season, we see a steady decline over the recent years here, and so these harvest rate estimates they're obtained through our tag return of our ear tag bears. In 2024, the harvest rate in this season was down to 4.1%. So historically, this is the season that was the main contributor to overall bear harvest. But in 2024, that was not the case. So the overall harvest rate was 13.6% across all seasons, and this was a lower figure than what we've seen in recent years. So the distribution of our harvest continues to be more evenly spread across all bear hunting seasons. Here on this figure, we see the various statewide bear hunting seasons, which show a general funnel shape from left to right as we add more opportunity and more seasons. And it generally just become tighter and kind of more similar across all seasons on total number of bears that are harvested. So here we can see our population estimates from about the past decade. So for 2024, the estimate was between 16 to 23,000. The point estimate was right around 19,000. But it's generally remained stable. There's a little variability in this as well, similar to Jeremy's numbers here. But it's generally remained pretty stable. So for the 2025 bear hunting season, we are essentially recommending a 1-week archery season. So this season will overlap with the statewide muzzleloader and the special firearms bear hunting seasons. And the reasoning behind this is that the previous expansion of the bear hunting seasons, they may have caused the general season to decrease both in hunter participation and overall harvest in that season alone. So this change would reset bear hunting seasons and have an increased emphasis again on that general season. And then going forward and kind of having that set as the standard season structure. So here we can see the proposed changes for the 2025 bear hunting seasons. So the only season that would be different would be that statewide archery season, which is in yellow here. So that would provide opportunity for hunters on 2 different Saturdays. And please note that this proposal is different what was previously approved. So it would require the board to make a floor amendment to make these changes for the upcoming hunting season. So moving on from that, just getting into our statewide survival project. So data collection has started for this project. So overall, this project's aiming to assess survival of adult and juvenile bears of either sex. From this data, we'll be able to better understand the impacts of each hunting season on the bears in various regions of Pennsylvania. This will also help us not only look at adult females in this capacity, which we've done in the past, but also adult males and yearlings of either sex as well. So far, we've collared 49 individuals for this project, and this project will go on until 2029. And I also wanted to provide an update that we are working towards creating a more defined season setting structure, and basically to provide better recommendations to the board. So this season setting structure is going to be looking at bear population trends and incorporate both hunter and public opinion, bear conflict data, and bear harvest and survival estimates. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for listening to me today and try and answer any questions anyone has.
Brandon, in reviewing seasons, I know we've talked over the years. My question on the regular firearms season, which is in that week of Thanksgiving, you mean you're reviewing moving that or possibly looking?
No, keeping that the same.
Okay, so then
Yeah,
my
yeah.
next question is that the optimal time or can it be moved?
I'm not sure if I've assessed that or not yet.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just asking. for
Yeah, I mean,
future-
historically I was set, to kind of protect the
Well,
pregnant
the reason
females,
I'm
but-
asking is, half the colleges in Pennsylvania are closed that whole week of Thanksgiving, and a lot of high schools, and we generally only have bear that week, and small game. So, just wondering what your thoughts are for future planning.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's something that we'll probably assess going forward.
Yeah.
But as of right now, I'd say that would stay
Okay,
the same. Yeah.
thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Where this went.
Brandon broke it. I don't see the mouse anywhere. Oh, there it is.
Do you think the deer population is stable in your area? What's that? Do you think the deer population in your area is stable? Yeah, I do. You were coming.
Don't worry, I fixed it, Brandon. We're all good. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amanda Hoyt, the waterfowl biologist, and this afternoon I'll be telling you about how we set our migratory game bird regulations, and I'll be going over the 2025-2026 proposed waterfowl seasons. But before that, I'm going to provide a brief update on the status of highly pathogenic avian influenza in Pennsylvania. So as we're all likely aware, HPAI had a resurgence starting in December of last year. It's impacted raptors, scavengers, shorebirds, and waterfowl primarily, and this outbreak is ongoing, with the most recent event being a mortality of black vultures in the southeast and south central regions. We're hoping that this spring and summer the outbreak dissipates. However, there are no signs that the virus will exit resident populations of birds that have been affected since this started in 2022. And that kind of goes along with the national trend that we've been seeing as well. So the map of detections on the left coincides primarily with waterfowl abundance clustered in the southeast and northwest regions of the state. Snow geese and Canada geese have been affected the most. In other parts of the state, mortalities have been seen primarily in Canada geese and mallards. The table on the right tells us the number of estimated sick or dead waterfowl. We can't test every individual in a mortality event, so the numbers are likely much higher than what's listed here. We continue to field and respond to over 100 HPAI-related calls per week. University of Pennsylvania Wildlife Futures Program, the PA Department of Health, PA Department of Agriculture, and USDA Wildlife Services have been critical in our response, especially the wildlife health techs with the Wildlife Futures Program, who have spent countless hours swabbing and testing dead birds for HPAI to confirm detections as soon as possible. So back to our regularly scheduled programming for migratory game birds, seasons and regulations. To get started, all migratory game birds are ultimately under federal authority and fall under the purview of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Those include webless game birds such as sandhill cranes, woodcock, doves, snipe, gallinules, coots, and rails. And of course, we have our web species, or waterfowl, which are ducks, geese, and swans. And before we dive further into the season setting process, we'll need to talk about flyways. There are 4 flyways in North America
for which boundaries are determined through band recovery data, and you can see simplified migration paths within the 4 flyways as an example on the right. As you can see, we're in the Atlantic flyway, so for waterfowl and those webless species I mentioned earlier, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service establishes a set of federal frameworks every year for each flyway. Frameworks include maximum numbers of days allowed in a hunting season, daily bag limits, earliest opening dates, and latest closing dates, as well as the number of splits each season can have. So what all goes into the creation of these federal frameworks? It's an ongoing and complex process that I've done my best to depict here with this graphic using where we stand right now and how we got here as an example. The blue star is where we are today within the 2025-26 season selection portion of the process. We are close to finalizing those season's dates and bag limits and are getting ready to start the breeding waterfowl population surveys, which will feed into our 2026-27 season setting process. The 25-26 season process began last summer. There was a summer flyway council meeting where we reviewed data from previous hunting seasons and the breeding waterfowl surveys we just completed, and that information we used to update model weights, which estimate waterfowl populations. The flyway voted on recommendations, which were then considered by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through the Service Regulations Committee, and the process continued with winter waterfowl surveys and another flyway meeting in February, which brings us back to where we are today, and we're gonna start that same process for 2026-27 very soon. So that's a brief summary of the federal process, but beyond that, each state needs to individually select their own seasons within those federal frameworks. In Pennsylvania, after we have the federal frameworks, we develop proposed seasons. Those seasons are derived primarily from results from the 2020 and 2023 waterfowl hunter surveys, as well as incorporation of public comments from years past. We then share the proposed seasons with senior staff, the regions, and the board for review and comment. The official season selections are then placed into the season selection letter, which is ultimately signed by our executives. So now I'll transition over to changes in the federal frameworks for this year from last year. Our first change is the daily bag limit for the Atlantic population of Canada geese, and that's been reduced from 3 birds daily down to 1. So AP migrant geese are a population that breeds along the east and west coast of the Ungava Peninsula, circled on the left map up top in red and yellow. Most PA wintering AP geese come from that east coast, circled there. Primarily APs winter in New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and southeast Pennsylvania, hence why we have our AP zone. And shifting over to our graph on the right, which shows estimated breeding pairs in northern Quebec, you can see that our latest survey indicates an even further decline from where we were last year. And although that pair estimate of 89,000 falls within the threshold for another moderate season, so on the graph there between the red and orange lines, it's the second lowest estimate we have seen since a total season closure in the 90s. So out of an abundance of caution, the Atlantic Flyway Council recommended a restrictive season of 30 days and 1 bird daily. This 30-day and 1 bird daily bag limit is not unique to Pennsylvania. Every state that has an AP zone has to adhere to the same regulations because they're defined in federal frameworks like I was describing before. In the map on the left, the darker brown range defines the AP zones within the Atlantic Flyway. PA and those states have absolutely no wiggle room on the AP zone season length and bag limits after they're defined in the federal frameworks. The map on the right shows band recoveries from geese banded during the breeding season on the AP breeding grounds, and these recovery locations are used to set boundaries where most AP geese were wintering or migrating through PA. And additionally, there's one more change I'd like to mention for the federal frameworks. Starting this coming season, northern pintail will have a flat daily bag limit of 3. Prior to that, it fluctuated between 1 and 3 birds, and that was based on breeding population numbers in the Atlantic Flyway. But from 2010 to 2018, the Atlantic flyway only accounted for 3.3% of overall harvest, which has very little effect on the population. So we're going to have that 3 bird daily bag limit from now on, as long as the other flyways have an open season for pintail. And those other flyways will continue to monitor breeding populations and have their bag limits change between 1 and 3 each year, like we were doing before. So now I'm just gonna post up these proposed duck seasons and bag limits. I'll just keep them up there for a second for you to look. There's really no changes from last year, just a little bit of a change in dates based on where days fall on the calendar compared to last year. And again, as I mentioned before, our AP Canada goose bag limit has been reduced from 3 to 1 bird. And I should mention that that's for the regular season only. Our statewide September early goose season is not affected by that, and it's going to stay at 8 birds per day. And that's because those AP migrants are not in Pennsylvania during that time. And there are no changes to light goose seasons and bag limits as well. And that's all I have for you today, and I can take any questions.
I have a question. With some of the temperature changes and so forth that we're having, and I know down in the southeast, I mean, visibly and kind of interacting with some of the sportsmen's clubs and even Audubon, I mean, there's fairly large, I guess, gatherings of birds in the area. I mean, would you say that's due to, temperature issues and so forth? I mean, but just generally seeing an increase in just large numbers. I mean, 500 to 1,000 is, I've gotten some updates from, just some observers that are purposely out. I mean, does that impact any of what happens with the, bag limits and just how we manage, and particularly given the, the avian flu issues as well, which I know is complicating a lot.
So I'm just going to go back to our little circle cycle graph here. So that could, if those large groups stick around, we have our breeding population survey coming up. The dates are April 15th to March 5th, and that's what we'll be gathering data to see what our breeding population of waterfowl looks like. So potentially, if those big groups stick around, those will be accounted for in that survey, and those would affect potentially our bag limits for the 2026-27 survey. So everything's kind of a year ahead, just the way that the federal process works.
Right. Do you know if eBird is used as part of what U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, looks at in addition to the banding?
eBird for the federal process is not used. I know some states use it to set their, I know New York uses it to set their seasons every year. They kind of have a, like a model set up almost to make everything very simplified year to year. But yeah, I know that the feds don't use eBird.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
Well, that concludes our staff reports. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 8:30.